Hey, what's up everyone? This is Gabriel from jgcrespomusic.com, and in today's lesson I'm going to be talking about a topic which most new musicians struggle with all the time, especially when reading different forms of notation, be it lead sheets, grand staff, piano type music, and or tabs, okay? What I'm going to be talking about today is chord spelling. Now when it comes to chord spelling, there are a number of ways you can spell out various types of chords. When we get into different genres, we might encounter different types of these chords, and I'm going to give you examples as we go through it, okay? The first type of chord we might see is just the letter. When we see just the letter C, we are being directed to play a C major triad, okay? So the note C, E, G, okay? Nothing changes about it, there's nothing altered, and it's definitely not minor, okay? Now the next type of chord we might see is minor. Now, there's a couple ways you'll see this written out. One of the most common ones is the letter of the chord followed by a lowercase m. So if this was A minor, you'd see A and then lowercase m. Sometimes you will see lowercase m followed by I. Sometimes it's spelled all the way out, C minor. And another really common way to see this written out in more of a jazz medium like the real book lead sheets is C followed by a minus, or the letter of the chord, root of the chord, followed by a minus symbol, okay? So that indicates minor. Now when it comes to seventh chords, we would just add a 7, okay? Like so. Now the next type of chord would be a major 7, okay? So for a major 7, I'm going to continue using the note C just so we can kind of have a point of reference. You'll often see something like that when it's C major 7. Now note when it's just a 3-note triad, C major, we're not going to indicate C major, we're just going to say the letter of the chord. So it's just going to say C, okay? So this is only when we're talking about sevenths and up. So if it was C major 9, we would change that 7 to a 9, okay? Now you'll see this when we get into dominant 7s, but there is the issue of 7/9, which indicates that you play the 7th and the 9th of the chord. In some cases, the arranger or composer of the song does not want you to play the 7th, they just want you to play that 9th of the chord. So that might be a 1, 3, 5, 9. So in this case, you can see C major 7 that we'll often see is something like this, okay? C major 7, this triangle indicating major 7, okay? So that's another way that you might see this. There are other kind of derivative abbreviations of this, such as C uppercase M, lowercase j, 7, okay, something like this. I've seen this as well before. Again, you know, it can be also spelled out, C major 7, you know, M-A-J-O-R. And those are the 3 main ways that I've seen this chord spelled out. As always, write in the comments if you have some alternate spellings of these specific chords that you have encountered in your playing time or just learning pieces of music. Okay, so let's get into the next type of chord. The next type of 7th chord that we encounter a lot, especially in the blues, are the dominant 7 chords. So most cases, you will see it written out like this, okay? The letter of the chord followed by just a 7, okay? Now this is not C major 7 or C minor 7, it's actually C dominant 7. I have seen this written out as C dominant 7, mostly in sheet music. For Latin artists, I have seen this. Just to name a couple, like Alejandro Sanz and Juan Luis Guerra, I've looked at some of their music and sometimes they'll have this. Now another thing that will come into play when we're talking about artists that are having their music published by a Latin division of, let's say, Warner Music Group, something of that nature, is they might employ the solfege. So instead of this being C dominant 7, this would be do, right? As in do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. Si, do is actually the usage of the solfege in Spanish as opposed to ti, do that we use typically in English, okay? So that's another way to write this out. And those are the main 2 ways that these dominant 7 chords are typically written out, okay? I'll write the third one with the solfege just to give you an example. You might get that do 7, do 7, which is that, or sometimes do dom 7, we're short for dominante, which means dominant, right? The same thing in English, so it's a dominant 7th chord, right? As far as the construction of these chords, I'm going to be uploading a separate video about that, explaining how we get these chords to these different qualities, okay? And we have 2 other types of triads which we can encounter, and these can also be turned into 7th chords as well. And those are the diminished and augmented chords, okay? So another chord you might see could be, for instance, this C, D, I, M, okay? Or it could be a 7th chord, okay? Now, one of the things that we encounter with diminished chords is it can be half diminished or fully diminished. That gets a little bit tricky with this spelling, okay? I'll show you another version of the same kind of idea, which tends to, I will show you another version of the chord right here, which gives you a clearer picture of whether it's half diminished or fully diminished. Now this way of writing out the chord to most will look like the Celsius sign that you see in measuring temperature, okay, in different parts of the world. However, this is this little degree looking sign to indicate diminished. Now, if we want to make it half diminished, we just draw that line through it, okay? So you could get something like this, or without the line there, it would be fully diminished seventh, okay? Again, alternate way of spelling out this chord, especially when we're talking about like a half diminished chord, is to spell it out as a minor 7 flat 5. So again, we'll take that tricky spelling that we'll see probably more in jazz and make it super easy once we understand how to go about it. So a C minor 7 flat 5, okay, or minor 7 flat 5 written out like this, okay, can be written out both ways. You want to start with the letter, which is the root of the chord, C. Focus on the quality of the chord, which is minor, so you need a minor triad. That means if you have a major triad, you need to flat the third, okay? Then you add the seventh, and then you go back and flat the fifth note of that chord, okay? So the G is going to turn into G flat, and we now have a C minor 7 flat 5. That's another way to write out a C half diminished seventh chord. Now the last type of chord we can encounter is the augmented chord, okay? Augmented chord can also be written out as a sharp 5 chord if it was just a triad. So sometimes you might frequently see something like C sharp 5, which could also be substituted for C augmented, okay, AUG. And we can turn these chords into seventh chords as well. Another way that we'll frequently see this augmented chord is with a plus, okay? Again, I know we use the minus sign for minor. The plus sign is not for major, it's actually for augmented in this case, okay? So that just means sharpening the fifth note of the chord. G becomes G sharp. Cool, so those were a few insights into chord spelling, a very convoluted topic in the musical community. Hopefully that clears up some misunderstandings when playing certain chords or having to figure out things by ear and kind of correct mistakes. Now you know what they're looking for depending on the type of notation you're looking at, okay, for chord spelling. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video.